The Banking Scene Director's Cut goes behind the scenes, sharing stories and insights to help you build the bank of tomorrow.
Hey, Rick, we're in the heat again.
Yeah, but for me, it's a matter of keep working in the heat, and for you, it's a matter of getting to somewhere even hotter for
Holiday, scuba diving. In less than 24 hours, I will be in the Red Sea. Yes, but 2
trying
weeks
not to
ago
annoy you
already.
too much over WhatsApp.
2 weeks ago already, I was honored to be invited to moderate a panel at the European Payments Council General Assembly. It was really hot in that room. Man, talk about heat. But the topic of the panel was the impact of agentic commerce on payments. And
Yes.
to give the audience an idea of the size of the prize, I had shared very early on a statistic from McKinsey who project that by 2030, agentic commerce will orchestrate between 3 and 5 trillion US dollars in global transaction volume, which is quite a big thing, quite a big prize to be.
I wonder how many times they did the retro calculation of these big McKinsey calculations, though.
And I wonder how many times any of these big fours predictions come right, or do they just
Exactly, that's
say
what I
them
meant. Yeah.
do they just say them in order to generate more consulting? We'll never know unless we start doing that. But you wrote a blog about the session because you were allowed to be in the room as well as a guest. And so what was your key takeaway from the session?
Well,
Besides the fact that you've seen this movie before.
and I'll explain you why that is. But I think first, the biggest observation was that the conversation was at the European Payments Council. I didn't hear a lot of talk around payments. We did have two people representing a payment scheme.
Mhm.
And of course, they all shared how important it is. And one was more involved in it than the other. But essentially, it was about the transformation of commerce more than
Yes.
it was of payments. Payments is just a very small element in the entire commerce process that's being transformed through agentic today. When robots start doing shopping, the entire process of shopping is changing, but the payment process may be a bit less. There you need some security guardrails, etc. And what made me realize there is that it may well be, in terms of impact from payments perspective, just another token like we had with the wearables, etc. Maybe I'm just minimizing a couple of things. Another observation, that's where you hinted to already. Have I seen it before? I think I have. Open banking, PSD2. Back in the days when I started working in banking again, that was somewhere 14 years ago. Wasn't live yet. There was a big fear that this would disrupt the banking model as we knew it. We haven't seen that change.
Mhm.
We did build the gates to banking, but as such, the impact was minimal. I think in this case, it may be different. The contributions of agentic commerce may be more tangible than what we saw with open banking, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe we are too anticipative for yet another hype. I don't know. And then a third one, and I linked to that as well, was like the open question: what's the role of banks in this agentic commerce space? Is it really just an acquiring versus an issuing game? And will it all be solved by the processor or the schemes? Or should we expect a very active role from the banking community as well? In other words, can I just lay back and wait until they get another scheme mandate to make sure that they have the required security things in place to secure the position of their customers, also in the agentic commerce space? Or do they need to do much more? Maybe even shape the way towards a safer agentic commerce space? That was for me an open question. Now, I know you had prepared another round of discussions, which you didn't get the chance to ask, even though you had, I think, 2 hours. But you kept the timing of the session, to my surprise. Which were the things that you were going to cover, but couldn't cover because of lack of time?
So the round 4, the final round that was supposed to have been the wrap up, was what should we be doing next? which might have answered some of the questions that you had, actually, because there were three things. You know how we love three. And there were actually three things that in my panel prep interviews, without sharing who was in the panel or who contributed in those interviews, there were three key themes that came out of those as responses to what should we be doing next. And one of the questions that you raised in your blog was, should banks once again wait until the dominant schemes, protocols, and interfaces have emerged before deciding how to participate, or should they actively help shape the standards, identity frameworks, and trust models that AI agents will rely on? Well, pretty much unanimously, all of the panelists had in one way or another said they believe the EPC should be doing more. And
I think we can share that. Of those panelists, not one was actually representing a bank.
Yes.
With that, I'm not sharing who was part of it, but I'm just sharing who was not part of it.
Correct, yes. And just for context, also the brief that we were given for the panel, if you don't mind me using the terminology was a little bit stuck in the present day, because we were given the brief to discuss the impact of agentic commerce from the issuer's perspective and the acquirer's perspective. That's very much today terminology, issuing and acquiring. So from the EPC's perspective, banks are either issuers or acquirers, or both. And so all the panel questions were designed around asking those four panel members what they believed the impact to banks from an issuing perspective or an acquiring perspective were, not from a general broad remit of banking perspective. So the first one was they all believed that the EPC should move beyond its current role as a standards body essentially for SEPA payments. I believe that that's how it started out in the first place. And they should actively take on or try and position themselves to take on being the governing body for protocol suitable for European agentic commerce. Now, that was a bit of an elephant in the room, European. We skirted around that, and that was in respect of the people who were on the panel, two of which represented large international organizations. And there was very much but we need to be doing this for Europe, European-specific protocols suitable for the European landscape. And the panelists were saying EPC needs to get involved. And if not the EPC as a body, then those members of the EPC, those banks, should get together and make sure that they're positioning themselves in a way that they can co-develop this protocol suitable for Europe. Otherwise...
For payments or for commerce?
Well, for payments within the commerce journey.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first one, was the people, EPC first, if not the EPC, then the members of the EPC need to get more actively involved. And, you know, there were comments of that we need a workable framework for how AP2 mandates and cryptographic consent interact with secure customer authentication under PSD2 or PSD3. That was comments that came from three separate panel members were around that. The current legislation doesn't include agentic payments because, of course,
it wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
Yeah,
but that there's a bit of a regulatory gap that is there. The second one was broadly the people said the industry. Now, when you talk about the industry, I believe that's a bit of a cop-out, because what are we saying? The industry must develop proactive governance structures for what one of the panelists described as the third actor problem. The gap when an agent sits between the buyer and the seller. Now, you had said there in the payments flow, you think that potentially agentic could just be another token. However, we did touch on briefly an agent. Is an agent a representation of you? Is it a separate legal entity? There has been some jurisdictions where...
Separate legal entity?
Yes. In America, there's been a court case where a customer agent operating on behalf of a large organization that was giving advice to its customers, wasn't in banking. It went to court, and the defendant was trying to argue that the agent is a separate legal entity. It's not part of them, but they've employed the agent, but the agent
And
is
what
its
was the
own.
conclusion?
I don't believe that court case has concluded yet. It's typical in America. Everybody goes to court over everything, but it has raised this question of what is an AI agent? Is it just you? And if it's you, how does it pass SCA? How does an agent pass SCA? And now, of course, there's this entire topic around know your agent. And the
Which makes
panelists
sense.
were saying that before the regulators impose frameworks that may not fit the commercial reality of how things work, we shouldn't be waiting for the EU AI Act or some AI liability directive or something to force it. We need to get on the front foot. Now, MasterCard has published through EMVCo a standard just recently. There was quite a bit of media announcement about that.
But it also shows there are different organizations to set standards that are probably better suited than the EPC for this kind of activity, like EMV.
Which is why the panel members didn't say the EPC needs to be setting the standard, but the industry needs to come together. So MasterCard's verifiable intent specification that has now been published through EMVCo, apparently 99% of EU issuers are already in place to be able to use this specification. And the verifiable intent extends your authority via the agent, but clearly it's you. The agent has to act on your intent. So then comes the third point that wasn't discussed, but the thing that we need to get ready is there's a whole discussion around liability and liability shift. Now, again, just before the panel, a week before the panel or so, American Express had announced that it will take on the liability for any transactions where their agent has acted outside of the boundaries set by the user. But again, the other schemes, we don't know what Visa, MasterCard, Wero, Epi, none of those have actually said, what happens when my agent makes a purchase? So we are talking about agentic commerce, as in not just the agent making a recommendation, but the agent actually carrying out the transaction. What happens if that agent makes a transaction and I state that was not my intent? The agent acted.
What would happen if you make a transaction with a contactless and you state it was not your intent?
Well, with a contactless, though, you have to be physically there to make a contactless transaction, right? It's very hard to deny that one. But it's more like your
device has to be there.
Yeah, it could be
I can
like
steal your ring.
You could say it's you told your wife to take your card and go make a purchase on your behalf, and she bought you something that was 3 times more than you expected, and then you go, no, I'm contesting this transaction. I want it reversed because my wife acted out. That would be a closer thing where you're actually passing your credentials over to somebody else, which you're not supposed to do. To these days, of course, you're not supposed to. So there is a question around over there, and a guardrailed approach to liability shift needs to be firmed up before this agentic commerce becomes more of a reality. Now, the fact is today, agentic commerce is not in widespread use right now. There's a couple of banks who have said that they have done experiments with end-to-end fully agentic, no human interaction other than the instruction up front. But right now, people are mainly using agent platforms for the discovery side and things like that, not for a full end-to-end commerce. So those were the 3 things that the panelists were going to use that round of questions as a call to action to the people sitting in the room, not just at an EPC level, but actually to the individual banks. Because I think, if I remember rightly, there were 85 banks in the room, I think according
And
to
organizations, yeah.
yeah,
Quite a few.
banks and organizations. It was a lot. It was a broad representation across Europe, as you would expect from the European Payments Council. So that was going to be their challenge. Get involved in formulating these standards before they get done to you, because otherwise the default is we're just going to end up adopting standards that potentially aren't even suitable for our geography and our regulation, and we're going to have to try and force fit it into our regulation. So that was just a bit of a warning that came out of that.
But clearly, in the AI space, everyone's talking about it. Banks need to work on everything. We recently released our own white paper on agentic AI. There was not too much agentic commerce in there at all. Nevertheless, we did see a very strong appetite. We announced the interview with Thomas Gering of ING. That was probably our best viewed interview we ever published on YouTube. And also the white paper, after a week, it got viewed more than the fraud white paper, which was also quite a success earlier this year. You were the author.
It's actually been viewed more than any of the white papers that we published last year as well. I checked
There
up
you
this
go.
morning.
There you
So
go.
we'll have to put a link to
Absolutely.
the article, to that white paper, because if the people are listening to this, it's not much about agentic commerce, but it's all about agentic AI and the future of banking.
And I think our conversations on AI will not be over yet, because I'm currently conducting a couple of interviews on open banking and embedded finance. And after a couple, I always see the discussion reverting back to AI one way or another. Now, I haven't interviewed any regulation specific people yet, but the ones who were involved in open banking in the past, PSD2, etc., are currently slowly moving towards what can we do with all this open banking data in a context of AI. So suddenly also our open banking and embedded finance research risks to evolve to something more towards AI as well.
Sure, that's going to have to be at least a chapter in the white paper. With our open banking kickoff webinar that we had with Nicola Breyer, that quickly developed into an AI and open banking together as being the future. So, Rick, since you're going to be writing the next white paper and you're doing the interviews on it at the moment, can you give us any hints about, is it too early for you to say what is going to be in the open banking white paper?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
I just didn't know if you had an angle.
No, the idea is to have a look at part regulation, although we see a big slowdown, but also explain perhaps why that is. There was PSD2 that moved to PSR and PSD3. We don't hear that much about it. FIDA, a topic that's been silently discussed for 2-3 years now. There's still nothing going on. In informal talk recently, I heard that maybe because of politics, because if big tech's not involved, what will be the consequences from a trade and diplomacy point of view with the United States? So it's an interesting discussion that has completely pivoted compared to a few years ago. And of course, if you look at open banking today, what's shaping open banking, I think, and that still needs to be validated, of course, but it looks like it's more market-driven than it is regulation-driven these days. And I could imagine a scenario where the standards may no longer be defined by the market, but maybe one or two AI tech companies that start collaborating, one of the biggest banks in Europe or a few of the biggest banks in Europe, that way setting the standards for smaller banks that are forced to follow because otherwise they lose out. I don't know. That's just an hypothesis. A lot of things to dig into for me in the coming months, but I really look forward to it.
Fabulous. And hopefully the first of those interviews will be able to be published soon. We won't give anywhere more than that.
Yeah.
Other to say, watch this space. There's going to be a series of interviews on open banking and related, and probably a whole lot of AI mixed in there as well.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think I'm going to go and pack my scuba gear and get ready for my holiday, and I'll see you back again in 10 days.
Enjoy
the time without me.
You deserved it.
Thank you.
Speak soon. Bye-bye.